Albu. What would you expect from a young average male, 170 to 180 centimeters in height, average vertical jump, etc., in snatch, clean and jerk? What could 99.99 of those people do if they train properly? Can I go first and then you can go?
Okay. Go for it.
99.999% of people will do very, very poor numbers because they won't go and get a coach, they won't stick with training long enough to get good lifts, and they won't just do the things you need to do, which is basically being miserable to be a weightlifter all the time, as in Gurf. But my honest answer is I think 99.9% of people won't make it to 100, 120 unless they have a good coach.
I think, like, the best numbers you could probably hope for being like an average male, I think like the best thing you could ever really hope for, like, and this is just you actually made the effort to be good at weightlifting, bar taking drugs. You did everything bar taking drugs. Honestly, I think like 120, 150 is like is amazing work. And before, if you'd asked me this 5, 6, 7 years ago, I'd have been like, sure, most men can probably get to 120, 150, no problem. But time has worn me down, and people have worn me and my patience away. And I think most average men, whatever that means, whatever you want to take it to be, I generally don't think can barely get to 120, 150 with many years training, let alone get beyond that. So I think if you get, this is kind of a how long is a piece of string question, but I think if you got to like 120, 150, you're doing pretty good, And I know we might see a lot of people on Instagram doing this or a bit more and a lot more, but they're the kind of, they're the lads who could do it. So it's kind of a positive user bias or whatever, or positive user effect, or, we're seeing people who are able to do it. For most people, 100, 105 snatch is a really good snatch to get to. 110 is actually very good going, like a 130 clean and jerk. Now the difference between kind of 105 and 130 and like 120 and 50 doesn't sound a whole lot, but believe you me, that's about 10 years of training for a lot of people. It's interesting because I would have thought a couple of years ago, I genuinely would have thought a lot of people could get to 120 and 50 pretty well, but in reality, people just can't.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, but
it's just the nature of it as well. Like,
yeah.
I think the thing is, like, a lot of people don't recreationally sprint. If you start to look at the amount of people who could do like close to Olympic level sprints, like there is almost none, and people wouldn't expect it.
Yes,
because people know like that. Oh no, I'm not type 1 versus type 2. My ratios are off.
Yeah.
And they've heard all of this.
Yeah.
But then because everyone goes to the gym, they're like, oh no, I'll be able to, if I train really hard, I'll be able to make it.
Yes.
I feel like I'm being really cynical today.
No, but we talked about this with Seb on these podcasts, and we're coaching Seb to get to 120, 150 at the moment, and I'll tell you a good indicator if you were going to be a good weightlifter. If you don't get to at least 100, 120 within the first like 14 months, you're just not going to be a good weightlifter. Yeah. If you don't get to 120, 150 within the first 3 years, you're definitely not going to be a good weightlifter. And that's just an experience from what we've seen from natural lifters who start in their late teens, for example, which is kind of a lot of people at the moment. Not a lot of people at the moment, but some people at the moment. So if you don't get there within 3 years, chances are you're just not going to get any further. Because if you think about the rate of progress, just won't go that fast. If you don't get to that, it just seems likely that you'll never be able to do more. Now, if you get to that, it doesn't mean you're going to be a good weightlifter, but it certainly means that you have the possibility to get to like 140, 180 kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I got to 100, 120 within like a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I was not a good weightlifter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Joe,
yes.
like, so you can't.
I think at 100 after about 9 months, I'd say. With a break at Christmas between that as well. So I think at 100, 120 after about 9 or 10 months. And I've seen other good weightlifters who started around me would have gotten very similar to that.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, if you're 60 kilos or whatever, it's a little bit different, but most people beyond 75 kilos should be able to get to something like that if you're going to be a good weightlifter, of course. So Tom is a good question. Lots of masters lifters, right? Any advice for masters lifters? So this is at 60 minutes, right?
You have a load of masters lifters, don't
Too
you?
many masters lifters, right? Okay, so this really, really, really depends on what, from what I've seen, right, is what that masters lifters have done in a previous athletic life. So if you were lucky enough to get a talented masters lifter who has done a lot of stuff before, the problem is it even depends in on what kind of sport they did before. So a good example is I have a masters lifters who is 44, 45. He's going to the Masters World Games next year, which is a separate thing entirely, where they have like a couple of sports at the Masters World Games. I
No
didn't
way.
even know it was a thing. So he used to be a collegiate track athlete in America, and then he did Masters over 30 athletics, which was great. And then a couple of years later, he started weightlifting with me. So I come a couple of months ago. He is very talented, right, and it's very, very useful. However, so one of the downfalls of that is he has picked up some sensitive injuries over the years. In particular, his lower back has those issues. So we can load his volume and intensity like we would with a normal lifter. We just figure out the maxes or whatever, and then we progress that. However, what we've seen happen with my man is that he back can very easily flare up. Sometimes without, so we'll solve one symptom of the back injury or solve one source, and then a training cycle and a half later that will flare up. So the advice is be ready for that to happen. Be psychologically ready for that to happen. Be psychologically resilient enough that when you're coming back, that you have the patience. And he has a great where you're just like, oh, my back went right. This is just part of my training as a 40-odd-year-old lifter. And so I just go, okay, we just start progressions again. You just restart the training block and go real, real slowly. And then you try and figure out what the source of that is. Well, the back issue was, or your knee issue, or whatever the injury was. You try to figure it out, try to fix it. And you can fix them. You for sure can fix them. It's not a thing in your 40s where you're unfixable, things won't recover. You definitely can. But you just have to be ready for that to happen. My advice is, though, is don't hold back so much on thinking, a master's lifter, I can't recover enough, I can't train a lot. From what I've seen, recoverability and training intensity is very, very similar to most intermediate lifters. Whatever, what happens is that injuries do crop up more often, and they take them out for a little bit longer. The other scenario then is what we have is a master's lifter who is basically not very talented and have had no real athletic history. Okay,
The UA.
the UA, right? The UA, so it's onset of adult athleticism, is a master's athlete who is not very talented, hasn't a lot of physical literacy, has poor mobility, but has a great desire to train, which is always phenomenal. What you have to do in that scenario is you really have to preempt injuries. You do have to be cautious. So when we have that lifelong athlete, we can go, they understand the nature of the game, they understand that injuries happen in sports, psychologically and physically they're ready, they're resilient physically and psychologically to stuff injuries like this, so it's okay for them. However, with our kind of dog shit athletes, are people who are just not a lot of strawberry jam. So we have a saying where you can't make strawberry jam out of dog shit. So if you have people who are kind of genetic muck, who are not so great, but are still lovely people and they're great fun to coach and they're very enjoyable to coach, I might add, you just have to be real cautious with injuries coming up, because sometimes these injuries are psychologically very damaging or very hard for that athlete to get over because they're not used to pain, especially when this pain kind of transfers over to their real life. For example, when they are finding it difficult to work or just be kind of concentrating their work because they're in pain, and also their body seems to be less able to be reformed themselves from these injuries. Oftentimes these injuries either through a lack of experience with pain or very possibly just their organism is not well adapted to is not very resilient to sports. So then when they do get these injuries often are a lot bigger of a magnitude. So they won't be recurring injuries. Sometimes they'll just be new injuries, and they will be of a bigger magnitude, brand new. So they will be oftentimes harder to come back from, harder for that athlete to psychologically come back from. So also the issue with this as well, and the kind of not so strawberry jam athletes is that we do see as well is that these injuries kind of just come out of nowhere as much as they can. So oftentimes injuries are never planned. Of course, you don't plan to get injuries. You don't. Oftentimes people get injured, they'll ignore stuff. I have seen though is with the kind of non-ideal masters athletes is that you see totally fine, mobility's getting better, stability's getting better, strength's getting better, confidence is getting better, and then we'll see a random injury. It'll be back, leg, knee, something like that, when hopefully they've reassured me that there was no pain prior until the event. And so that then is something you need to kind of look at yourself, like, are you a former good athlete and you can kind of progress as normal, or are you an athlete who hasn't done a lot of training, so then you need to be real cautious with preempting your stuff.